Okay, excuse the beanie. My hair is a mess right now, but I have a question for some of you guys. Have you guys ever been standing on the side of the road, right? Like on a sidewalk or something like that, and you just see a bunch of cars passing by, right? Like hundreds, and I think to myself, damn, there's a lot of fucking people on Earth, you know? Especially just on this one little strip of land. You know, I live in Maryland, and it's just like, even just in Maryland, on this one little strip piece of street, I'm seeing many cars, and that's a whole bunch of people with stories that I know nothing about. You know, whole planets to be explored and stuff like that. You know, they're complex. They're just like me, or at least that's what I'm supposed to believe. But I have no reason to believe otherwise, right? And I say that because China has a lot more people. You know, they have over 1 billion more people than we do, and I'm sure Wendover. You know, when we got a video from Wendover Productions, China's electricity problem. I'm sure their electricity problem might have something to do with the amount of people that they got. Okay, it's hard to keep up with that many people. But the thing is, you know, they're not having many babies anymore, so they're not going to keep exponentially growing. So that's not a problem. You know, like people like Jordan Peterson, they preach that the problem is we're actually not having enough babies. But we'll see about that. You know, we don't know. Let's go. Enough time.
China has a problem. The country's getting hotter and it's getting wealthier. While isolation one is a global challenge.
See, those two things, they normally wouldn't seem like a problem. Hotter, though, they're not talking about attractiveness. I'm sure they're just talking about the heat. Because, you know, attractiveness, that wouldn't be a problem. But, like, wealthier, that means people are going to be more, like, you know, picky with their shit. They're going to want to use more resources out of the land when you're wealthier.
Challenge and the other a domestic triumph. In concert, they present an issue because of this, the air conditioner. Fix China on its latitudes and move it along the longitudes, and one can see that its size, shape, and southernness is not all that different from the US is, and that reflects in its climate. Beijing's temperatures closely track with those of DC year-round, while Shanghai's reflect those of Atlanta. That's to say, China, like the US, is hot. Much of the US developed in an era of air conditioning. Florida, Texas, and Arizona had their biggest population influxes at a time when inside and out no longer correlated, and this is a direct contributor to the fact that the US today has the highest electricity consumption per capita of any major economy.
I believe it.
China's marching down the same path.
We use a lot of energy, man. Hey, man, I be leaving my computer on sometimes.
Made today are being sold to a Chinese person. Simply put, as personal income grows...
Wait, you said 2 out of every 5? 2 out of every 5? How many air conditioners are being... I mean, look, that's like I said, there's a lot of Chinese people.
Being sold to a Chinese person.
God damn.
Simply put, as personal income grows, air conditioning use grows. And so on the hottest of hottest days, some 50% of electricity consumption in China is now directly devoted to cooling down buildings. And this is only a single instance of a broader phenomena. Across the board, the exponential increase in electricity consumption as nations grow wealthier is a well-accepted and well-documented phenomenon.
Yeah, like I said.
Regions have found a tenuous equilibrium between wealth gains and efficiency gains. Europe and the US's year-over-year electricity consumptions have more or less plateaued, but China's looks like this. It's just growing and growing and growing.
Okay, at least we're not
most crucially, no country the size of China has ever in history developed at the speed of China. Its people are marching up the wealth pyramid at an unprecedented pace, and so too, of course, is its electricity consumption. This has led to difficulties. China's no stranger to the occasional power crunch.
But what do you mean by wealth?
Growing economy,
like, how can you have that many, are just that many more people in China getting wealthy? Like, are more and more people in China getting wealthy? How's that possible? What are they doing? Are they just working hard? Aren't there naturally going to be a lot of wealthy people, considering how much people they have? Like, they'd have to have more wealthy people than we do, right? You'd think so. Unless if their economy was just absolute dog shit, which it's not.
These effectively represent growing pains. But the power crunch across China in September and October of 2021 was different. As in other periods of unseasonably high temperatures, power-strapped grid operators accounted for an uptick in air conditioning and fans by cutting streetlights and other municipal power uses they could live without. Then they placed cuts on industrial users, notifying manufacturers and suppliers for the likes of Tesla and Apple that factory operations would have to slow for the coming week or two. While the move put a damper on the Chinese economy rallying for the first time since pandemic shutdowns, a temporary slowdown wouldn't be a major issue in the grand scheme of things. Then it got worse. Scorching droughts persisted across central China, winds unexpectedly died in the north, and across the entire country, coal reserves dwindled to a day or two's worth. Suddenly, the power crunch became rolling blackouts. For hours, Chinese cities went dark.
Everything?
In Laoyang, cars stacked up when traffic lights shut off, and metal workers ended up in the hospital when factory exhaust systems shut down. Shops ran by candlelight, city advised residents to stock up on clean water, building managers asked tenants to take the stairs, while at least...
Dude, imagine that craze. Imagine when you're gonna run out of clean water, people are gonna be running into stores like they did for toilet paper when the COVID pandemic first started kicking off. I never did that. I actually didn't even go to stores. I think my parents, like, just where they worked, I think they might have taken some of the supplies that they had in the back from, like, the cleaning people. I think we just took some of those supplies just in case, because they heard about the craze and everything. They're like, just in case. We don't actually believe they're gonna like run out of whatever, but like just in case. I feel like in China, you start telling people that there's a scarce resource, there's gonna be problems just because of how many people there are, dude. Imagine like stores and shit. They have so many cities with over millions of people, bro. It's not funny how many people they have. It's gonna be a problem.
One family got stuck in an elevator when power suddenly cut out. The international media called it unprecedented, and some Chinese citizens compared the outages to living in North Korea. Ooh. To understand the true source of the crisis, beyond the short-term
that's a diss to North Korea
balance, one must understand China's electric grid, and to understand its grid, one must understand this: coal is everything.
Okay.
The two other areas with similar GDPs, Europe and the US, produce about 18 and 21% of their electricity with coal, respectively.
And that's
in
not
China,
new. That's not clean,
it's 62%.
Damn.
In fact, about half of the entire world's coal power generation capacity is within the People's Republic. In context, this isn't surprising. 2 or 3 decades ago, coal was far more significant in Europe and the US's energy mix, but in the years since, there's been a notable shift towards cleaner, more flexible natural gas-fired power plants.
Yeah, I'm about to say, coal is not clean.
At least not easily. One of the country's critical weaknesses in today's world is that it lacks significant domestic oil and gas production. It imports about half of the natural gas it uses, which means it's expensive, which means it doesn't use the fossil fuel for generating electricity, at least in any significant way. Meanwhile, China is swimming in coal. Enormous deposits sit in Inner Mongolia and the Shaanxi and Shaanxi provinces. The country has more natural coal deposits than anyone but Russia, Australia, and the US. Many forms of renewable electricity generation are now cost competitive with coal and gas generation, but remember, China has been growing unbelievably, unprecedentedly fast.
Look at these buildings.
While the overall cost per kilowatt hour of solar, for example, might be the same or lower than that of coal power, there's the question of when the money is spent. With solar, nearly all of the cost is upfront in the production and installation of panels. With coal, however, the cost is more distributed through the lifetime of use. There's a lower initial installation cost per unit of capacity, but it raises through time with use as coal has to be purchased to keep the generation ongoing. So, when a country is growing at such a pace, it's much easier to spend less upfront to add capacity, knowing that more money is coming, rather than spend a larger amount upfront knowing the savings will come later. It's that simple reality that has undergirded the centrality of coal in China's energy mix.
Okay.
Now, the companies actually producing power in China are almost universally...
Man, that's probably, that's why I heard, China's pollution was bad. I don't know how true that is. I heard that pollution was bad, like... Could this be attributed to how much of this shit is just like unclean? Like I'm sure using a lot of coal for energy is not good for the environment, right? That's what that's why it's not called a environmentally healthy form of power creation, whatever. Power production. Like energy production.
Own enterprises, but despite reporting up to the central
look
government
at that shit
on a day-to-day basis,
you can just look at that. Does that look like it's healthy for the environment?
Businesses do act with a certain degree of autonomy, responding to market conditions similar to how a privately owned enterprise would. But this is a unique market. Beijing regulates how much power producers get paid for the electricity they make. Typically, it hovers around 8 cents per kilowatt hour, far below the world average. The country considers this crucial because, still today, it's a largely industrial economy. Industry requires power, and just as China is competitive with the rest of the world thanks to its low labor costs, it's also competitive thanks to its low electricity costs. But low costs...
See, this is what I don't like about competition, man. You gotta have shit like this. This is the only way to be like China. There's no other way for them to be a number one. Because when people start getting concerned with being number one, I hate it, man. I fucking hate it. I'm sorry. I don't care. Like, I'm not sure because I'm not the one that's directly impacted. I don't feel like, I mean, I don't feel the direct impact of being number one, but I'm sure there's a lot of things that would go unnoticed that are very nice to have in being number one in something, right? Like, if you were the last country in something, that means you're not gonna have a lot of money flowing around. Shit is gonna probably be ass. There's not going to be enough money being put into things. Money runs the world, right? So you want to be number one because number one means you're making the most money. But it's also like, I hate that competition aspect of the world because the only way China can be number one is if they pay their fucking citizens literal fucking slave wages, bro. It's not really slave wages, but you get what I'm saying. Like, some people are genuinely slaves. Like, we can't act like slaves. There's more slaves now than there were back in the 1800s, back with the slave trade. There's more slaves now. How many of those are from China? I don't know. There's a port here in Maryland where they be bringing in slaves and shipping them out. I'm pretty sure I heard something like that. I don't know how that's, if we know about it, I don't know how we haven't stopped it if it is. But that's what I'm hearing.
This mean nothing if there's no electricity to be consumed. Notably and crucially, Beijing does not regulate
this competition
the cost
thing,
of
man.
coal.
It kind of pisses me off.
Wildly
People are too worried about being more efficient
in the rest of the world. So companies get paid a fixed amount for what they make, but their input cost, the coal, changes. It doesn't take an expert to spot the potential issue with this. So why not renewables? Ignoring for the moment the difficulties in upfront financing, if solar and wind are competitive in cost with coal-fired power and aren't vulnerable to the short-term up and down fluctuations in coal prices, wouldn't they be the clear winner? Wouldn't a solar installation producing for less than 8 cents per kilowatt hour be a guaranteed profit machine? Yes, but
there's always a but, of course.
Live where favorable conditions for renewable energy simply aren't. The country's greatest solar energy potential lies largely in the arid west and along the northern border. The same goes for wind.
Is red better? Or is red bad? Usually red is bad on graphs. But is red better for this?
These regions in the far west and borderland north are also where the nation's most consistent wind potentials lie. The difficulty is, more than 90% of China's population resides on the southeast side of this divide, far from the most productive areas.
Most people would live on the coasts.
Even when it comes to the nation's most heavily developed renewable, hydropower, many of the nation's largest dams are located in southern and southwestern China, near moderately populated areas, but still far from the most densely populated provinces. Making the most of renewable resources and the already impressive amount of renewable infrastructure the central government has built out then requires efficient means of transferring electricity over vast distances and a flexible, interconnected grid.
Damn, and that's a whole lot of shit that you gotta build. So the reason they're not building it is just because they're not, the major cities are not close enough to where these infrastructure can be built for renewable energy.
Solar installations and wind farms China's taken on in the past decade is an equally impressive assortment of transmission lines increasingly connecting the sunny, windswept hinterlands to population and industrial centers. This is an ultra-high voltage power line, and of the 36 that exist globally, China's home to 34 of them with plans to build more. While standard overhead transmission lines run from 110 to 500 kilovolts, these run from 800 to 1100, resulting in massive efficiency gains.
Excuse me?
These run from 800 to 1100.
Regular run from what?
Transmission lines run from 110 to 500 kilovolts.
Kilovolts?
These run from 800 to 1100, resulting.
So these are a whole different. These are a whole different unit of measurement that we use. This is ultra high voltage. They have 34. So where are the other two?
In massive efficiency gains, and in turn allowing these long-distance lines
to 34
times the power of a standard line. In China, they've been identified as the key to linking areas of high energy consumption with areas of high renewable production. And yet, while these infrastructure investments had built out wind and solar plants in remote areas as far east as the deserts of Xinjiang, then connected them directly to industrial centers like the Anhui province, 2,000 miles or 3,200 kilometers away, China has yet to make the most out of their green investments. At the end of 2020, a report surfaced that
what are we saying about fusion? You think fusion is the future? That fusion shit? Fusion nuclear core reactor, whatever the fuck they're called. People are just... Oh, it's not safe. Shut up.
High voltage lines.
I say I have not read into it, but I say fusion is the future.
For a country with a still
100%.
climbing coal habit, this dramatic underutilization was disappointing, but not necessarily an indictment of the physical grid. Rather, an indictment of how China's grid works on a policy and pricing level. China's yet to properly incentivize their renewables. They've addressed the supply side, but largely ignored demand. Critical to the full implementation of China's solar and wind farms and the power lines connecting them to population centers is the willingness of Chinese provinces to buy energy from one another. Because energy rates are set by the government rather than a market, provinces, which are largely in charge of their own grids, have prioritized purchasing electricity within their own borders, regardless of its origin, to keep the money local.
What?
Why give another province the work that could exist within? And because the provinces that need more power are more densely populated or more industrialized, they're probably eastern or coastal and likely buying power from nearby coal plants rather than out-of-province renewables. Available renewables then take a back seat. They get used mostly as provinces buy this electricity as capacity insurance during peak surges. While flexible, interconnected, and national in theory, China's grid's still just more regional, rudimentary, and coal-oriented in practice.
So these motherfuckers just don't want to give the work to anybody else.
Done enough to facilitate the nation's monumental rise, but as Chinese coal consumption, consumer standards, average temperatures, and weather variability rise too, the challenge will be keeping up. And in 2021, it didn't. Given the continued centrality of coal in China's energy mix, the move they took in the middle of 2020 was bold. They banned Australian coal.
Excuse me?
This move occurred in response to the Western nations' calls for an investigation into the origins of COVID-19, but up until that point, Australia supplied around half of China's imported coal. Still, as the world's largest coal producer by orders of magnitude, the ban on Australian coal, even when entering winter, could be managed, as long as it was the only challenge to manage. Next came 2021, and with it, the recovery. As China's strict quarantine and control measures virtually eliminated the COVID virus from its territory, construction and heavy industry roared
The fact
back.
that they did that with 1.4 billion people will forever be amazing to me. It will forever amaze the fuck out of me, bro. The fact that they managed to pull that off? Get out of here. There's no way. How have they done that? How, Sway?
While the sector signaled signs of life from the previously dormant Chinese economy, they also put pressure on the grid, as the first half of 2021 saw an 11% increase in coal demand from the year prior and an 8% increase from 2019. But as business boomed, under the surface, cracks were beginning to show. While China was burning more coal than in years prior, it was hardly producing any. Here, in the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, China closed over 30 mines over land use violations, halting production for months.
The fuck are they doing? They're fucking themselves up.
Coal mines closed for over a month for safety inspections after a worker died in an accident.
Damn.
And at the same time domestic supply hit snags, so too did international. Indonesia, China's newest #1 coal supplier, was hit by a heavy storm season that derailed its export goals. Heavy storms led to record flooding in Zhengzhou, China too, requiring emergency reroutes of coal into Henan province. But the rain didn't last, and as 2021 progressed, much of China entered an intense drought which severely hampered hydroelectric production. All the while, global coal prices skyrocketed to over $200 per metric ton, 4 times its average from a year prior. Chinese mines struggled to produce, while Chinese power providers drained reserves to at least minimize their losses while producing for a higher cost than they could sell, then claimed they were going offline for maintenance to further mitigate their financial damage. 20 separate provinces
Everything's just going wrong.
experienced some of the most significant rolling blackouts in decades. The global supply chain was thrown into further turmoil as producers were forced to cut back or shut down production. While the crisis passed, the bedrock of the nation's economy had been exposed as a brittle embarrassment of a system.
Damn.
China's stuck between a rock and a hard place. The rock is the expectation, both domestic and international, of continued tremendous economic growth, and the hard place is the unknown of continued.
You're telling what? Why is there? Are you kidding me? Why is there that? What is that? Is that a tether? The fuck is that?
Tremendous.
Are you telling me that tugboat is pulling that? I think that's just for extra help. There's no way. Yo, but look at this fucking ship, man. Oh my god.
economic growth, and the hard place is the unmitigated,
I was just amazed.
Climate crisis. China knows it needs to cut back. It knows this both because of the ironclad science of climate change and because of its own practical experience. Less than a decade ago, China, and specifically Beijing, had some of the worst air quality in the world. And this wasn't merely unpleasant. While it's tough to accurately measure, researchers have attributed 1, 2, or 3,000 excess deaths, not per year, but per day, to air pollution in China.
Jesus.
The issue escalated to such a degree that international employers started awarding hazard pay to staff sent to the country to compensate for the very real health effects of simply existing
hazard
in
pay?
China.
Yo, somebody send me down to China, dog. I'm trying to get that extra paycheck. Shit.
The largest single factor behind this tremendous air pollution was coal, both for power generation and household heating purposes. Well, in the decades since the country has made tremendous, unprecedentedly fast progress in improving its air quality, it's still far above World Health Organization targets and is still the source of myriad excess deaths per year. But in this instance, China's air quality crisis served a demonstration to Beijing that its comes with a very real, very tangible cost.
Just a hot spot for death,
the
man.
world recognizes it needs
have
to
that
tackle
many
the climate
people
crisis to avoid the worst future of unlivable temperatures, destructive sea level rise, and deadly superstorms. The world and China itself also recognize that China is, by an enormous margin, the single largest source of carbon emissions, responsible for more than double the CO2 than the US, even if per capita emissions are lower. And remember, its trend line looks like this. All eyes are on China to play its part. So, as the world descended on Glasgow for the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, China made a commitment. The nation would reach peak carbon emissions by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060. This is aggressive. Japan said it will reach carbon neutrality 37 years after its carbon peak. The US is giving itself 43 years, and the EU a full 71.
So what does that mean? Somebody that's made it this far into the video. By the way, thank you if you have. I appreciate you. Video's almost over. Hang in there. What the fuck is carbon neutrality? And how is China planning? Okay, so the EU is giving itself 71 years. China only 30? Even less than Japan? So they're going to reach carbon peak. Does that mean that like the most carbon emissions they're ever going to produce is going to peak at 2030? So that's like 8 years. I don't even have a watch, but like that's like 8 years, you know? Fuck. Damn.
China is saying they'll do it in 30, despite the fact that their peak will be far higher than any others.
Hey, look.
This is China. This is the country that committed to 50 years of Hong Kong autonomy. This is the country that said a mere 300 died in Tiananmen Square. This is the country that says all that's going on in Xinjiang is the lawful detention of Uyghur terrorists. Can any Chinese commitment be considered truthful?
Ooh.
Well, when it comes to climate, it's possible.
You had us.
Iteration of the UN.
That man had us, bro. He had us with the... Yo, that man was straight up gonna go in on China. He was roasting them. By the way, that shit with the Uyghurs, you know, I'm not even... I shouldn't be pronouncing because I butcher it, but... Like, oh my God.
Conference on climate change, China committed to reducing its carbon emissions per unit of GDP,
shady stuff.
a metric known as carbon intensity, by 45% relative to 2005 levels by 2020. According to the United Nations itself, China hit this 3 years early in 2017. At COP21 in Paris in 2015, the country committed to go even further and reduce carbon intensity by 65% relative to 2005 levels by 2030, and China still has every chance in the world to hit that. So that's to say, based on the past promises, maybe China actually will peak its emissions by 2030. But back when originally setting its carbon intensity targets, the primary criticism among experts was that China was supposedly already on the path to hit 45% reduction by 2020. In fact, according to International Energy Agency data, the pace of decline actually slowed in the 5 years after the 2009 commitment relative to the 5 years before. Again, carbon intensity is a measure of emissions per unit of GDP.
I don't even know what that means. What is even that metric of measurement, bro? GDP, what do you mean?
Not overall emissions, so a reduction in carbon intensity was to be expected as the country's economy started to shift from
CO2 per dollars of GDP? How are those two even related? Wait, I'm sorry, am I stupid? I must be. Because, like, what does that even mean? CO2 levels per dollar spent of GDP. So is that like the amount of money that you're spending to produce this the cost of carbon emissions, I'm guessing?
From industrial to service-based.
What am I saying?
The new 2030 carbon
I'm just
goal,
dumb.
however,
Well,
is
not really,
different. China
I
is
don't
not
get that
currently
one.
on that path, and with just 7 years left on the clock, it's getting hard to believe that it can get on that path. China's climate commitments came before its power crisis, and 2021 and 2022 have demonstrated where the nation's priorities lie. A majority of the world's planned future coal power plant construction is within China, and just last year, Beijing authorized another 370 million tons worth of coal production to go online, reversing their prior commitments to reduce the fossil fuels production. Analysts and observers have also noted a marked tone shift among Chinese officials, more often bringing up the need for energy security in their transition towards renewables. And in December 2021, at China's annual Central Economic Work Conference, policymakers finally suggested what everyone else already knew: that there could be a delay in hitting their emissions targets as they focus on their economy. The economic story of China over the past decade has been this: a slow slide out of the era of record-setting GDP growth, placing pressure on the leaders whose power is undergirded by the continued march towards superpower status. But it's clearer than ever that China's GDP growth is tremendously linked to carbon output, and that carbon output has to stop. For the health of its own citizens, for the pressure placed by the international community, and for the pragmatic global realities of climate change. So what's happening now is a tenuous dance. They can take one step forward on decarbonizing, but that relies on taking one step back on growth.
And we all know what takes first seat. You know, we all know what takes back seats and what takes the front seat. The front seat, like I said, ever since we're in this competitive fucking world, right, where everything is just enlightenment style thinking, let's use reasoning and critical thinking and logic to apply this to every single system and every single thing in the world so we can maximize efficiency at every level. Right? Because that's what's number one for people. It's just efficiency. We got to drop this new phone every year. We use the technology that already exists to perpetuate the fucking next technology that's going to exist. We use the technology that we build upon every single year, and it just keeps growing and it keeps growing, and it's like an exponential thing every single year. We gotta bring out a new phone because we've now created this culture where people must get the new phone every single year, because otherwise, if they're stuck with that old 13 that came out a year ago, that shit is ass. They need that 14 extra plus max plus deluxe. You know, like, it's just crazy. It's just crazy to me, man. Efficient, man. Fuck your efficiency. I'm sorry. I don't care. I'll skip out on new technology. I'm sorry. I don't care at this point. Like, just stop. I don't care.
Step forward.
I love technology too. That's coming from a person that loves tech.
Taking one step back on diplomatic stature. China can manage and mitigate, but at the end of the day, the past decade has borne out that renewables can't come soon enough, because soon enough, in China's eyes, is the pace of growth enabled only by low-cost, high-carbon energy. It's economy versus climate, social order versus public health, tomorrow versus the day after. Having met plenty of
more like today
Wendover viewers, I know that there tends to be a bit of a type. Most of you are highly motivated up with you meals.
Shuts out, get your money in. Fusion is the answer. I'm kidding. I don't know what the answer is. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you guys want me to react to next. I might get another China video off today. Just cause. I don't know. Today's just a China day. I guess. I don't know. I don't know. But hey, if you made it to the end, I appreciate you a lot, man. I love you. You know, I gotta say it from the bottom of my heart. Anybody who ever makes it to the end of these videos, look, man, I appreciate you, because these videos be long, man. Wendover made a long video. I wasn't even trying to make it that much longer, but I made it, and I'm gonna end it right here because I don't want it to go any longer. I appreciate you. I'll see you guys in the next one, okay? Subscribe and all that good stuff if you want to.